Welcome to Pages to Dialogues, your premier destination for insightful discussions on Christian books. Join me as we delve into the pages of thought-provoking Christian literature and explore the timeless truths and principles that can transform our lives. From classic devotionals to contemporary bestsellers, we'll engage in meaningful dialogues that will inspire, encourage, and challenge you to grow deeper in your faith. So, subscribe to Pages to Dialogues now and join the conversation. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you can stay updated on new episodes and exclusive content. Let's turn pages into conversations that matter.
All right, welcome back for another deep dive with us. This time, we're going to be talking about dating. Specifically, how to date well with healthy boundaries.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, it's a topic that I think a lot of people struggle with. So our guide for this is Boundaries in Dating by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. It's written from a Christian perspective, so just so you know.
That's right.
But even if you're not a Christian, I think there's still a lot of valuable insights in here. What I found interesting was that they don't treat boundaries like they're walls to keep people out.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's not about shutting people out. It's more like, giving you the tools to build a good relationship, a solid one.
Okay, so not like get away from me, but more like here's how we can actually make this work.
Yeah, exactly.
I like that. So why do they think boundaries are so crucial in dating?
Well, think of it this way. Without boundaries, you're kind of stumbling around in the dark. You might stay in bad situations for too long, you give too much too soon, or even end up in these power struggles where someone is trying to control the other.
Yeah, not exactly romantic.
Right. Not exactly a recipe for romance.
Yeah, and I bet that leads to all sorts of heartache down the line. The book talks about that, right? Like, what happens when those lines get blurry?
Absolutely. Cloud and Townsend talk about how a lack of boundaries can make you question, like, how committed are we both? Like, are we just casually dating or is this going somewhere serious?
Right.
And those conversations can be tough. But without them, you're setting yourself up for confusion and hurt feelings.
Makes total sense. They also talk a lot about honesty. I remember this one story about a marriage falling apart because of a lie, and it really hit home how even small deceptions can eat away at the trust that's supposed to be holding everything together.
Oh, yeah. And what I found insightful was how they broke down the why behind those lies. Some people do it out of fear or insecurity. Maybe they're afraid of conflict, of getting hurt. Then there are those who lie strategically, almost like they're getting something out of it,
That's a really good distinction. So figuring out why someone might be dishonest could help you decide if the relationship is even worth saving. Exactly.
But even before that, it makes you look at your own honesty.
Right.
Like, am I being upfront with my date and also with myself?
Right. That self-reflection is crucial.
Totally. So the book also dives into faith, which obviously comes from the Christian background, and they argue that having similar faith is super important for building a lasting relationship. So it's not just about checking off boxes like goes to church or whatever, but really understanding where the other person is at spiritually.
Exactly. Cloud and Townsend talk about digging into someone's faith story, not like an interrogation or anything, but a genuine conversation about how faith plays into their life.
Sure.
And then you got to look beyond just their words, right? Do their actions actually reflect their beliefs?
Walk the walk.
Yeah, walk the walk, exactly. Because honestly, someone can say they're devout, but if their lifestyle tells a different story, that's a red flag.
Yeah, for sure. And there's this idea they bring up about spiritual autonomy, which I think is really interesting. Could you explain that a bit? Sure. Basically, it means your partner shouldn't be relying on you for their entire spiritual journey. They should have their own strong connection with God, not expecting you to fill that role.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. It's about two whole people coming together, not two halves trying to make a whole, right?
Yes, exactly.
I'm also thinking about how they talk about loneliness and how dating shouldn't be a quick fix for it. They have that story about Marcia who kept jumping from one bad relationship to the next just to avoid being alone.
Oh, yeah.
It's so relatable.
Marcia's story is a good example of what happens when you try to use a relationship as a Band-Aid. You're not actually building on anything solid. It's like if you're building a house, you need a strong foundation. If it's built on shaky ground, the whole thing's going to crumble eventually.
Right.
Same with relationships. You got to be okay with yourself, with being alone, before you can truly connect with someone else.
It's like that saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. If you're not taking care of your own emotional needs, how can you show up for someone else?
Exactly. And they also encourage you to become, as they put it, a historian of your own dating life. I was thinking about that. What kind of patterns have you noticed in your past relationships?
Oh, good question. I'll have to think about that one. But speaking of patterns, they talk about Jim, who kept falling for women who were maybe too eager to be with him.
Right. And on the surface, that might seem like a good problem to have. But the book highlights how Jim was actually drawn to this type because he was insecure. He needed that constant validation, so he wasn't picking partners who challenged him to grow.
Hmm. It makes you wonder, are we sometimes attracted to people who reinforce our own insecurities, even if it's not healthy in the long run?
It's definitely something to think about.
Yeah.
And the book really pushes you to examine that if you're repeating any unhealthy patterns.
Yeah.
They really stress the importance of knowing your deal breakers.
Okay, so before we jump into that, for someone who's never heard that term before, what exactly are deal breakers?
Well, it's about knowing the difference between something you just prefer and something you absolutely cannot compromise on. So preferences are like, I'd like someone who's tall. But a deal breaker might be, I need someone who respects my boundaries.
Yeah.
Those are the non-negotiables, the things that, if they're not there, the relationship is a no-go.
That makes sense. So it's about setting those boundaries early on and being honest with yourself about what you truly need in a partner.
Right. And sometimes that means walking away from someone, even if they're charming or attractive, because if they don't align with your core values, you're setting yourself up for disappointment.
Right. It's not worth it.
Yeah. They also dive into this concept of the attraction paradox, which is so fascinating.
Ooh, tell me more about that.
Well, they basically say that we're often attracted to people who are not good for us long term. Have you ever felt that pull towards someone who you knew deep down wasn't the right fit, but you just couldn't resist that spark?
Oh, haven't we all been there at some point? But why do you think that happens?
They give a few reasons. Sometimes we romanticize a relationship, overlooking red flags because we're caught up in the excitement.
Sure.
Or maybe our idea of intimacy isn't fully developed, so we're confusing superficial chemistry for a real connection.
Oh, that's a good point. So it's about being honest with yourself about what's driving that attraction. Is it genuine compatibility, or are you trying to fill some void with this person?
Exactly. And they challenge you to ask yourself, am I mistaking superficial attraction for something real? Because let's be honest, butterflies fade. But a solid foundation, that's what lasts.
100%. So much truth in that. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll continue this deep dive into boundaries in dating. This is making me think about that whole opposites attract thing. It's often seen as a good thing, like you balance each other out. But the book seems to suggest that maybe it's not always so rosy.
Yeah, they actually caution against putting too much emphasis on opposites. Like, sure, complementary traits can be good, but if you're constantly leaning on the other person to fill in your gaps, that's a recipe for trouble. It can turn into this unhealthy dependence where you're not really growing as individuals.
Ooh, so instead of challenging each other to become better versions of yourselves, you're almost using each other as crutches.
Right. They use Lindsay and Alex as an example. Lindsay was super drawn to Alex's assertiveness because she struggled to stand up for herself. But instead of using that relationship to learn from him and develop her own confidence, she became overly reliant on him to fight her battles.
I'm guessing that created some resentment down the line.
Exactly. It's like
Right.
Alex felt pressured to always be the strong one. And Lindsay never really learned how to advocate for herself.
Yeah, that's not good.
So the takeaway here is that even if you appreciate certain qualities in your partner that you might not possess, it's crucial to focus on your own growth. Use the relationship as a support system, not a substitute for personal development.
So it's about recognizing those areas where you might be tempted to lean on your partner too heavily, and then actively working on those things yourself. Don't just outsource your personal growth, right?
Spot on. And building on that idea of self-reliance, the book has this really powerful message about resisting the urge to change yourself just to please your date.
Okay, I think a lot of people can relate to that. It's so tempting to mold yourself into what you think they want, especially in the early stages of dating.
It is. And, on the surface, it might seem sweet or romantic, but Cloud and Townsend point out that it ultimately leads to an inauthentic connection. You're not being true to yourself, and that breeds resentment over time.
It's like you're building the relationship on a lie, right? Because you're not showing up as your true self. They have that story about Carrie, who constantly suppressed her own needs and interests to please her controlling boyfriend.
Yeah, and Carrie's story is a cautionary tale about what happens when you try to fit into a mold that's not meant for you. You end up feeling stifled and resentful, and the relationship becomes this constant power struggle.
That sounds exhausting.
It is. It highlights how important it is to be your authentic self from the start.
Because if your partner can't handle the real you, then they're not the right partner for you.
Exactly. Speaking of being true to yourself, They also talk about the importance of taking things slow, like slow and steady wins the race kind of approach to commitment, especially if you haven't fully what they call left home emotionally.
Hmm. What do they mean by leaving home in this context?
It's about becoming a self-sufficient adult who's not overly reliant on their family for emotional support. They argue that going through this process is crucial for building a healthy and independent partnership.
So it's about being able to stand on your own 2 feet emotionally before you try to merge your life with someone else's.
Exactly. And they warn against mistaking a desire for marriage with a genuine connection with a person. Sometimes we can get so caught up in the idea of finding the one and settling down
Mm.
that we overlook red flags or force a connection that's not really there.
It's like putting the cart before the horse, right? Focusing on the outcome merit instead of the process of getting to know someone and building a solid foundation.
Right. And this ties into another warning they give about getting kidnapped in a relationship.
Kidnap.
Yeah, they use Debbie's story to illustrate this. She was dating this guy, Nick, and he was like subtly controlling and manipulative. Over time, he chipped away at her confidence and independence until she was almost a shadow of her former self.
Wow, that's a pretty intense image. It sounds like something that can happen so gradually that you might not even realize it's happening until it's too late.
That's exactly the danger. And this is where having those external support systems, your friends, family, mentors, is so important. They can often see the warning signs that you might be missing because you're too close to this situation.
Like they have that outside perspective that can help you see things more clearly. What are some of the ways this kidnapping can happen?
Well, they talk about how it can start with subtle criticism and put-downs. Like in Debbie's case, Nick would constantly comment on her appearance, her interests, even her friends. It was all very gradual, but it slowly eroded her self-esteem and made her doubt her own judgment.
So it's this insidious chipping away at your sense of self, like death by 1,000 paper cuts, almost. What else do they mention?
Another tactic is isolation. Nick started slowly distancing Debbie from her support network, making her more dependent on him for validation and companionship.
So by cutting off her connections to other people, he was able to exert more control over her. That's really scary.
It is. And then there's the manipulation of guilt and obligation. Nick would often make Debbie feel responsible for his happiness, which made it harder for her to assert her own needs and desires.
This is all sounding really familiar. I think a lot of people, myself included, have experienced at least some elements of this in past relationships.
It's more common than we'd like to think. But the good news is, Cloud and Townsend offer some excellent advice on how to protect yourself from this kind of kidnapping. First and foremost, they emphasize the importance of maintaining your own separate identity and interests.
So don't lose yourself in the relationship. Keep doing the things you love, spending time with your people, and nurturing your own growth.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to be assertive about your needs and boundaries. If something feels off, speak up. You have the right to say no, and to expect your partner to respect your limits.
And if they don't?
That's a huge red flag. If you see a pattern of disrespect or controlling behavior, it's time to take a step back and seriously reassess the relationship. And remember, you don't have to go through this alone. Reach out to those trusted friends or family members for support and guidance.
That outside perspective can be so valuable, especially when you're caught up in the emotions of a relationship. This whole conversation about kidnapping really highlights the importance of self-awareness in dating, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's about recognizing your own vulnerabilities, your patterns, and the types of people you might be drawn to, even if they're not good for you. That self-awareness empowers you to make healthier choices and create relationships that are built on mutual respect and trust.
Okay, so we've talked about boundaries, honesty, taking things slow, red flags. What about conflict? Because let's be real, disagreements are bound to happen in any relationship. How does the book approach conflict in dating?
They actually dive into that quite a bit. They acknowledge that conflict is inevitable, but emphasize that it's how you handle those disagreements that really matters. They make this interesting distinction between a boundary problem and a character problem.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's the difference?
So a boundary problem might be something like disrespecting your partner's feelings, blaming each other for problems, being chronically late, or pressuring someone for sex or money. These are issues that, while potentially serious, can often be addressed through open communication and a willingness to compromise.
So it's about those behavioral patterns that might be causing friction in their relationship, but they're not necessarily deal breakers.
Right. But then there are character problems. These are deeper issues that involve fundamental flaws in a person's character, like dishonesty, a lack of empathy, or a pattern of abusive behavior.
Okay, that makes sense. Those are much more serious issues. That might signal that the relationship isn't healthy or sustainable.
Exactly.
Hmm.
And they can be much harder to resolve. Often they require professional help
Mm.
or even a separation from the relationship.
So how do you tell the difference between a boundary problem and a character problem? Because I think it can be really hard to discern sometimes, especially when you're emotionally invested in the relationship.
They suggest looking at the pattern of behavior. Is it an isolated incident or is it a recurring theme? Is your partner willing to acknowledge the issue and take responsibility for their actions? And how do they respond when you set boundaries? Do they respect your limits or do they try to push back
Ah,
or manipulate you into getting their way?
those are all good questions to ask yourself. So it's about paying attention to those patterns. And how your partner responds to feedback, it's not just about the issue itself, but how they approach it. What about when it comes to addressing those boundary problems? What kind of advice do they offer?
They give some really practical communication tips. First, they emphasize the importance of being direct and assertive. Clearly state your needs and boundaries without being aggressive or accusatory.
So it's about being firm but respectful.
Exactly. They encourage using I statements to express your feelings and focusing on the specific behavior that's bothering you, rather than attacking your partner's character,
Right.
for example. Instead of saying, you're always late and it's so disrespectful, you could say something like, I feel hurt and unimportant when you don't show up on time. It would mean a lot to me if you made an effort to be more punctual.
Oh, that's a much better way to frame it. You're not accusing them, but you are clearly communicating how their actions are impacting you.
Right. It's about inviting understanding and collaboration rather than defensiveness. They also emphasize the importance of timing and tone. Don't bring up sensitive issues when you're angry or exhausted. Choose a time when you can both be calm and receptive to hearing each other's perspectives.
That's good advice for any difficult conversation, really. It's about setting yourself up for success by choosing the right time and place to talk.
Exactly. And be prepared for your partner to have their own perspective and feelings. Approach the conversation with a willingness to listen and understand their side of the story, even if you don't agree with it.
It's about recognizing that conflict doesn't have to be a battle. It can be an opportunity for growth and deeper understanding if you approach it with the right mindset. Now, we've talked about setting boundaries, but they also emphasize that it's not enough to just set them. You also need to be prepared to enforce them with appropriate consequences.
Absolutely. And this is where things can get tricky. It's about finding that balance between protecting yourself and giving your partner the opportunity to change. They offer some examples of consequences that might be appropriate for different situations.
So it's not about being punitive, but about sending a clear message that certain behaviors are unacceptable and that there are consequences for crossing those boundaries.
Exactly. For less serious offenses, it might be something like taking a break from the relationship for a few days or limiting contact until the issue is addressed.
And for more serious boundary violation,
It might involve ending the relationship altogether, especially if there's a pattern of disrespect or harmful behavior.
okay, so it's about being willing to walk away if your boundaries aren't being respected. And in some cases, it might be necessary to involve a third party, like a therapist or counselor, to help navigate the situation and set healthy boundaries.
Right. Sometimes you need that outside support and guidance, especially if you're dealing with a particularly difficult situation.
This whole conversation about conflict and boundaries really reinforces the idea that dating is a process of learning and growth, doesn't it?
It is. It's a journey of self-discovery, both individually and as a couple. And those challenges, those conflicts, those moments of boundary setting, they're all opportunities to learn more about yourself, your partner, and what you truly need in a relationship.
They're not necessarily failures, but rather opportunities for growth and deeper understanding. Speaking of growth, the book also delves into the importance of emotional and spiritual maturity in dating.
They make this really interesting point that sometimes the people we're drawn to romantically might be reflecting our own unmet needs or unresolved issues from childhood.
Ooh, that's fascinating. So it's not just about who they are, but about what they represent to us on a deeper level.
Exactly. It's this idea that we might be subconsciously seeking out partners who fit into familiar patterns, even if those patterns aren't healthy.
Like we're attracted to a certain type because it triggers something familiar, even if that familiarity isn't necessarily good for us.
Right. And they illustrate this with the concept of the attraction paradox.
Yeah.
We might be drawn to someone who's exciting and charismatic, but who ultimately lacks the depth and emotional maturity to sustain a healthy relationship.
So we might be initially attracted to the surface stuff,
Right.
but then later realize that there's not enough substance there to build a lasting connection.
Exactly. They encourage us to look beyond the surface and ask ourselves, what's driving my attraction to this person? Am I seeking validation or trying to fill a void? Or am I genuinely connecting with who they are at their core?
It's about being honest with yourself about your motivations and recognizing those patterns that might be leading you towards unhealthy relationships.
Right. And they also emphasize that true intimacy requires emotional vulnerability
Mm,
and a willingness to confront our own baggage,
yeah.
both individually and as a couple. You can't build a truly intimate connection if you're not willing to be open and honest about your past hurts and insecurities.
It's about creating a safe space for each other to be vulnerable and authentic. And they also talk about the importance of spiritual alignment, right?
Absolutely. They argue that sharing similar values and beliefs is crucial for creating a foundation of understanding and support. You don't have to agree on everything,
Yeah.
but having a shared sense of purpose and a similar approach to faith can be incredibly bonding.
It's like you're on the same page spiritually, which can make navigating the ups and downs of life a lot easier.
Right. And they encourage couples to explore each other's faith stories, not just their religious affiliation, but their personal journey with faith, their doubts, their struggles, and their triumphs.
So it's about understanding the why behind their beliefs, not just the what. That deeper understanding can create a much stronger connection.
Exactly. Now, speaking of strength, the book also talks about the dangers of overdependence in dating.
So it's not about finding someone to complete you.
Exactly. They caution against relying on your partner to complete you or to meet all of your emotional needs. A healthy relationship involves two individuals who are whole and independent, each bringing their own strengths and experiences to the table.
So it's not about two halves making a whole, but two wholes coming together to create something even greater.
That's a great way to put it. And this ties back to the importance of leaving home emotionally, which we talked about earlier.
Yeah.
It's about becoming a self-sufficient adult who can stand on their own 2 feet, both practically and emotionally.
So you're not looking to your partner to fill in your gaps or to rescue you from your own life. You're both responsible for your own happiness and well-being.
Exactly. They also warn against using dating as a way to escape loneliness or to fill a void in your life.
That makes sense. If you're coming into the relationship from a place of neediness, you're setting yourself up for an unhealthy dynamic.
Right. It's about recognizing that you need to be content and fulfilled on your own before you can truly build a healthy and fulfilling relationship with someone else. It's like that old saying, you can't pour from an empty cup. You need to nurture your own well-being first and foremost.
And that involves cultivating your own interests, hobbies, friendships, and support systems outside of the romantic relationship. You need to have a life outside of your partner, right?
Absolutely. Now, they also offer some really practical advice for navigating the physical aspect of dating.
Oh, let's talk about that. I think this is an area where a lot of people struggle with boundaries.
It is. They talk about the importance of setting clear boundaries around physical intimacy and honoring your own values and beliefs. What feels right for one person might not feel right for another, and that's okay.
It's about being on the same page with your partner and respecting each other's comfort levels.
Exactly. And they emphasize that true intimacy should be an expression of committed love, not a way to prove your worth or to manipulate someone into staying in a relationship.
That's a really important distinction. Sex shouldn't be used as a bargaining chip or a way to get someone to like you.
Right. They encourage open communication and a willingness to discuss those boundaries honestly and respectfully with your partner. You should be able to talk about these things openly and comfortably without feeling pressured or judged.
It's about creating that safe space for vulnerability and honesty. And it's about recognizing that physical intimacy is a powerful and sacred aspect of a relationship, and that it should be treated with care and intentionality.
Exactly. And finally, they offer some really powerful words of encouragement for anyone who might be feeling discouraged or disillusioned with dating.
I think we could all use a little encouragement in this department. Dating can be tough.
It can be, but they remind us that dating is a journey, not a destination, and that the goal is not simply to find a partner, but to grow and learn about ourselves along the way.
That's a really important reminder. It's not just about the end goal of finding someone, but about the person you become in the process.
Exactly. They encourage us to embrace the process, to learn from our mistakes, and to trust that God has a plan for our lives, even if we can't see it yet.
It's a message of hope and resilience, reminding us that even when dating feels challenging or frustrating, There's always an opportunity for growth and transformation. It's like those tough dating experiences, they're not just like random bad luck. They're actually refining what you're looking for, showing you what doesn't work so you can get closer to what does.
Yeah, yeah. It's a beautiful perspective shift. Instead of getting bogged down by the setbacks, you start to see them as valuable lessons.
Absolutely. Okay, so this deep dive has been packed with so much good stuff. Honestly, I feel like I've been handed a whole new toolkit for approaching dating with more intention and self-respect. They've given us a lot to think about.
Well, it all comes down to this empowering message. You have more control over your dating life than you might realize. You get to choose who you let in and what kind of relationship you're building.
Cloud and Townsend really hammer home that point about honesty, don't they? It's not just about being upfront with the other person, but checking in with yourself, too.
Right, because if you're not being honest with yourself about what you want and need, how can you expect to build a relationship on solid ground? They say that honesty is a foundation of trust. And without trust, you're just building a house of cards.
Right, it all falls apart.
Exactly.
And then right alongside honesty comes the importance of respect. Respecting your partner's feelings, their boundaries, their values, their time. It's like the golden rule of dating, right?
Absolutely. You treat your date the way you want to be treated, with kindness, consideration, and understanding. And a big part of that is recognizing they're their own person, not just an extension of you or someone to fulfill your needs.
Right, they've got their own thoughts, feelings, dreams. It's about honoring all of that. And what really stood out to me was that emphasis on self-awareness. Knowing your patterns, the good and the bad. And even, like, what you're vulnerable to in relationship.
Right. It's like becoming a detective of your own heart, figuring out those blind spots.
Yeah.
Then when you see those red flags popping up, either in yourself or in someone you're dating, you can actually do something about it.
And that's where boundaries come in, right? Setting those clear limits, communicating them well, and then, this is the hard part, actually enforcing them. Yeah.
Boundaries aren't just about saying what you're comfortable with, but backing it up with action. It creates a safe space for both people to be their true selves without fear of getting hurt.
Yeah. I love how they emphasize that boundaries aren't fixed either. They can change as you get to know someone better and the relationship deepens, like this ongoing conversation, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's not about drawing a line in the sand and never budging. It's about being open to adjusting those boundaries as you both grow.
Well.
And learn more about each other. And that requires trust and communication.
Right. Got both of those. Something else I found super helpful was their breakdown of preferences versus deal breakers. Sometimes it's easy to get those mixed up.
Yeah.
Preferences are like, it'd be nice if, but deal breakers are those must-haves for a truly compatible relationship.
That's right.
They really challenge you to get clear on your deal breakers early on, which I think can save a lot of heartache in the long run. It's about knowing what you truly value and not settling for less than you deserve.
Absolutely. And even when you do know your values, there's that whole attraction versus compatibility thing that can trip people up.
Oh, tell me about it. Sometimes those initial sparks fly with someone who, in the long run is totally wrong for you. The book really digs into why that happens.
Yeah. They point out that we can be drawn to someone for all sorts of reasons. And some of those reasons, well, they aren't so healthy. Maybe it's their looks, their charm, their status. But those things don't guarantee a deep and lasting connection.
No, they don't. It's about looking beyond the surface and asking those tough questions. Like, do I genuinely respect this person? Do we share similar values and goals? Can we actually communicate and work through disagreements? Those are the things that ultimately determine if a relationship has the potential for real, lasting love. And I think what really resonated with me throughout this whole book is that Cloud and Townsend, they view dating as a journey of self-discovery.
Yeah. Not just about finding the one, but becoming a better version of yourself along the way.
Exactly. They remind you that it's okay to make mistakes. Actually, those mistakes can be your greatest teachers, showing you what you don't want so you can get closer to what you do.
I love that. This whole conversation has been such a good reminder that even when dating feels tough, it doesn't have to be a dead end. There's always something to be learned.
There is. And they leave you with this message of hope and resilience. Even when it feels like you're hitting roadblocks, you can still choose to see it as an opportunity for growth and transformation.
So to anyone listening who's feeling discouraged or like they're stuck in a rut, boundaries in dating offer some seriously helpful tools and insights. It might not be a magic bullet, but it definitely gives you a better map to navigate this whole dating thing.
For sure.
You
You have the power to create relationships that are built on honesty, respect, and genuine connection. You just have to be willing to do the work.
And on that note, I think we'll wrap up this deep dive. Thank you so much for joining us. We hope you found this conversation helpful.
Yes, and remember, you are worthy of love and belonging, just as you are. Until next time, happy dating.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Pages to Dialogues. We hope you enjoyed our discussion and found valuable insights to apply to your life. If you did, please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel, Pages to Dialogues.